Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay and the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
This is the Black Gold Banneret Podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Sharon and Eric Lopez.
Welcome to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff Sharon and Andrew Glukov with you, starting off here on this summer edition of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Drew is back from getting some supplies for Lily. We're recording this on Wednesday, July the 7th. I already took care of all my shopping for the day, so we are all set. We got the hockey on TV. It's kind of a really chill show. We don't have that much news to go over, but we do have some news to talk about. And then we're going to take your listener questions that you were sending that you were sending to me earlier on Twitter. Drew, what's going on?
Well, Lily demanded milk, and we knew milk was running out.
As children do.
And it was forgotten about by a certain person not named Andrew, but lives in this house. So
You're
Andrew
really throwing your wife under the bus on this
totally.
podcast. You're really doing that. Oh boy.
I didn't throw her. I didn't mention her by name. No. Terry works at a pharmacy.
As you mentioned her name.
Yeah, totally throwing her under now. And I had to. Well, look at this one. I had to go gas up the car anyway. So let's make a
Kill
silver.
two birds with one stone.
Exactly.
Right. All right. That's fine. All right. We're going to talk about Before we get to, Eric is hopefully going to join us a little bit later. He's taking care of some softball stuff. But we're going to start by talking about basketball. Three big names coming back into the fold for UCF. Darius Perry is back. Isaiah Adams is back. And announcing today, CJ Walker is back. All three of them had left to go into the NBA draft's evaluation process. Darius actually walked on senior night. And we weren't sure about CJ. We weren't sure about Isaiah. We kind of thought that they would probably come back. Darren Green, Taco Fall did this earlier, but it's now official. UCF is going to have a full complement of those guys back in the fold for next year. So we're going to talk about that before we get to the listener questions. So Drew, I want to start with you. It's a huge, win for basketball here with these three guys coming back. Your initial impressions were any of these surprises to you?
Not at all.
Okay.
I expected them all to come back. The only person that I expected to leave and not come back was Brandon Mahan. But
and he went into the transfer portal and announced he's coming back.
Right. He was the one that I was expecting to leave and not come back. But hey, the gang's all here. They brought the band back together.
Yep.
There's 106 miles to Chicago and they have a full tank of gas. So I'm excited because look, this was a young team. Isaiah Adams was a true freshman. CJ Walker was a sophomore, but he had limited play at Oregon, and they needed seasoning. This team just needed to grow a bit and got derailed by COVID multiple times. And then Tony Johnson got hurt earlier in the year, and that was
COVID totally collapsed the offseason program prior to last season. I think that is such an underrated issue in sports this year was the offseason conditioning last summer. There basically was none.
There wasn't. And you had young players like Adams and Jamil Reynolds, freshmen who needed Isaac Ward. They needed that time, that practice, that just that chance to kind of start, getting their feet wet before the season was upon them. And you saw flashes early. They beat Florida State. It was a big win. And then it just kind of derailed with a combination of injuries and COVID. And yeah, other teams suffered the same issues, but every team has a different story. We all have a story. But with everyone coming back together, well, let me phrase that. Everyone who's important coming back together, this is going to be a good team. It's going to be a really good team. And UCF was able to shed away some players that weren't going to contribute all that much and bring in, please don't make me try to pronounce his name, but the transfer from UNLV gives them the big man that they've so desperately needed since Taco Fall left.
Yeah. I really wanted to bring up Darius Perry in particular because I had said at the end of last year, I didn't think he was coming back because I thought he was just one and done. He was going to move into the pros after that because he was a super senior, even though he had an additional year of eligibility left. He decides to come back after withdrawing his name from the draft. And what I thought, and I brought this up in the piece that we wrote up, sort of summarizing what happened. I mean, he walked on senior day. And I broke it down. The first 13 games, he only started. I believe he only started 3 of those first 13 games. He had some injury problems here and there. The last 10 games, he started all of them. And the difference, both offensively and defensively, I think for the team was night and day. Now, he wasn't the only factor involved in that, but in those first 13 games, UCF went 4-9. All right. They were giving up 73 points a game. The opponents were shooting 45%. They were getting out-assisted. They were getting out-stolen. They were getting out-blocked. And in the last 10 games, that reversed. Even though their scoring only went up 2 points a game from 66 to 68, their defensive points allowed dropped by almost 10, down to 64. Shooting percentage went up only a little bit, but the opponent's field goal percentage went down 5 percentage points from 45 to 40. That's a big drop off when you really think about, team field goal percentages over time, which tends to average out. 3-point percentage went up 4 percentage points for UCF. The assists went up by 3. Opponent's assists went down. Steals went up by 1. Opponent's steals went down by 3. That tells me that you have a really experienced ball handler, right? Taking good care of the basketball, which is what Perry really did. And even blocks for UCF went up where the opponent's blocks went down. So that tells me that you've got somebody who's first of all, giving his teammates good looks underneath the basket. And number 2, that defensive presence is allowing your big guys to cause havoc underneath. And then I think really the most important thing, turnovers went down from 15 to 11. And that was, to me, that Darius Perry's fingerprints are all over those numbers in the last 10 games compared to the first 13. He's the one who I'm really excited to see coming back and being that senior leader on the point.
And if you look at Perry's numbers, he was a team leader in scoring. You look at his per game numbers, he only had 3 games all year where he scored less than 10 points. And 2 of those were the first 2 games he played. So obviously, second game he played again, of the year, he played against Cincinnati, went 1 for 11 from the field, just, had a real worst day that he's had all season. It took a while. He found himself and he grew into the role as a leader. You bring back Tony Johnson and, now you've got 2 guards. That was one of the problems that Johnny Dawkins had, is he had no depth anywhere. So that's why he started playing positionless basketball. I think they'll start to kind of.
There was a point. Sorry to interrupt. There was a point where when Darius was hurt, Dre Fuller was playing the point because Tony got hurt. God bless Dre for trying that. He had to out of necessity, but that's not his.
It didn't.
That's
work.
not his natural position.
No, not at all. Just bringing back that depth, you can actually start having a more traditional team, and I think that'll benefit them. Going into the season, UCF had arguably the toughest non-conference schedule in the country last year. And this year is going to be difficult. Johnny Dawkins been hamming up the schedule, playing Oklahoma, Miami, Florida State, Michigan. We're talking, some legit programs here out of conference to really get things going. And I think those games are really going to help tighten this team up going into conference play. They're a legit threat in the American.
Yeah. By the way, the guy you were mentioning earlier was Sheikh Mbaka Jong.
Is that how you pronounce it?
I'm fairly certain that's how you pronounce it. I know that I should be a lot more well-versed in this than I am, but Sheikh Mbaka Jong, he's from UNLV, 6'11", 235. Super seniors, 21 points, 7 points, 6.2 rebounds per game, 3-year starter, 115 games in his career at UNLV.
That's a center you need.
This is a guy who's experienced. And to be honest with you, it's not. I didn't think it was because the center position was all that thin, because I thought Jameel Reynolds really played himself into the rotation toward the end of last year, and he did. He ended up starting quite a few games towards the end of the season as he got used to the conditioning that he really didn't have in the summer. He's going to be a serious problem,
and he's
for
young.
Teams down low. Yeah, he is young. But let's talk about. We talked about Isaiah. I want to really spend some time here on CJ coming back, because we know about the talent out of Sanford, Oak Ridge kid.
Block machine.
Yes, just a force of nature defensively. He's definitely the best rebounder I've ever seen wear a UCF uniform. And I think that the one thing that he was a little tentative on, believe it or not, was scoring offensively last year. His offensive numbers weren't spectacular. 7 points, 5 rebounds, 1.7 blocks per game. But you saw like the flashes of the athleticism, the speed as he would cut to the hole. And if he can get that, if the team is able to spend that time together that we normally see during the offseason, working on things, I think he settled in because he was a fairly late transfer. I think that he really, defense and rebounding is the one thing that kind of translates always. Offensively, I think it was really tough for him to find a rhythm throughout the season. He started too late in the year.
Well, he's raw.
Yeah,
that was my take on it. He's got he's energy out the wazoo, but he's raw, and he needed seasoning. But this season, I think he's going to get that seasoning, and having Darius back. I think Darius was really key to having him in there because it was so critically important for him to get a rhythm offensively that CJ was finally able to get. So this is going to be looking really good. Really quick, before we take a quick break, your prediction for the starting 5 this year, because suddenly Luke Saris tweeted this earlier, this team is loaded. I mean, you could have Darren Green coming off the bench as your 7th guy, theoretically. So if you're now, I know Johnny Dawkins would probably like, hey, look, I'll run a different starting lineup out there depending upon whatever I feel like, but or whatever matchup I have. But what would be your starting 5 if you were Johnny Dawkins right now? Well, you got to put Darius Perry at the point. That goes without saying. Then you've got Brandon Mahan at the 2. You got Isaiah Adams at the 3, CJ Walker at the 4, and Jong at center. That would be my starting 5. And you're right. There's plenty of depth that you can interchange some of these guys. Tony Johnson can step in. Jameel Reynolds can step in.
Don't forget that young point guard that they also picked up in recruiting, Darius Johnson too, who's been getting a lot of play of late.
Yeah, and I don't want to put pressure on a freshman if it's not necessary. And this team, especially because of that extra year of eligibility, doesn't have to put too much of a load on a freshman. They can ease them in. So I wouldn't expect them from a starting standpoint, but definitely within that potential 8th man, 9th man.
I would want to put Jong at the 5, Walker at the 4, Adams at the 3. I would, and depending upon the matchup, I would flip Mahan and Green and start Darius Perry at the point. and I would probably lean towards Green starting at the 2 because of his shooting ability. But again, that depends on the matchup. Like if you have a team that's really good at if you're playing a team that's really good at defending the 3, then I would put Brandon Mahan in because he can create his own shot. On the other side, if I'm playing a team that has a really strong interior defense, I'm going to want to stretch him out a little bit more. So then I would put Darren Green here. This is a nice problem to have if you're Johnny Dawkins. Really, it is. So this would be a lot of fun. We'll see a lot of Dre Fuller, Jameel, like you mentioned. Tony Johnson should be back healthy. That'll be a real help to UCF's depth. John Rothstein, as we wrap up this segment, is going to be. He said upon the return, he was the first one to report the return of C.J. Walker. He said UCF is the sleeper team in the American Athletic Conference. Do you agree, Drew?
Absolutely. They struggled last year, from injuries and COVID and lack of cohesion and all this other stuff. They fixed the glitch, and this team they're going to be solid. They've had a whole year working together. There's chemistry. You saw it later in the year when things started to gel after that midseason collapse. Be excited. They need our support.
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I'm real. All of a sudden, here we are. We're 53 days from football, and I'm already like, I can't wait for basketball season. This is going to be good. Before 2 full academic years prior to this one, every UCF team sport had a winning record, and it wasn't. This past year was where it finally derailed. So they got to make up for lost time. They're going to play hungry. Let's throw this year out because of COVID. Just throw it out. All right. When we come back,
punt.
Yes, when we come back, Eric Lopez is going to join us. We're going to have our questions from you, the fans. Sent them over to us on Twitter. I got some really good ones that we're going to ask Eric and Drew when we return here on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Stick around. I'll be right back.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.
Welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff Sharon, Andrew Glukoff, and joining us now after breaking some hot and heavy softball news is Eric Lopez. I put the APB out, fellas, for some audience questions, and we got a bunch of them on Twitter, and some of these are pretty good. So, I would like to try and make this kind of a regular thing. So, folks, if you're listening, send us some questions to UCF_Banneret on Twitter. Our DMs are open there. You can also hit us up individually. Jeff_Sharon, Statboy Drew, Eric Lopez, Elo. I want to start with, all right, Eric, let's start with a rowing question. What do you think about this? All right.
All right.
This is from Corey Esquenazi. All right. And Corey sent us a bunch of questions. So apologies to everybody else. He sent us like 5, and they're all good. So we're gonna answer every single one of them. After a, quote, down year, end quote, can UCF rowing start a new streak of conference titles?
First of all, this is like the historic first in the history of all UCF podcasts.
We're leading with
rowing questions. This is, wow.
Listen, this is why we do this. This is why we cover all these sports, because people care about all these.
No, they do. You're right.
That's why we care about them.
They can continue. I mean, look, the league has gotten better. I think Becky Kramer would be the first to tell you that.
SMU got better, that's for sure.
They were ranked 12th in the country. And so, I think they can bounce back, but it won't be easy. Teams are catching up. They've been the top team. Teams are making up. Now, if this was a normal year, if the rules would have been followed, UCF would have still been in the NCAA tournament, but the Ivy League got some special treatment because they're like the SEC of rowing, which is it sounds weird. So they got some waivers, even though they agreed they weren't going to play any sports this year because it wouldn't be healthy.
They went to 0 regattas prior to the NCAAs.
Right.
0.
Yeah. And somehow they got in. So anyway, so for people
You
that
thought
think,
football was rigged. Let me tell you.
UCF suffered from the rowing version of the Montreal screw job.
How about yes, let's stop focusing on expanding the football playoff to 12, where the same teams are going to win anyway. Let's expand the rowing championships, all right?
Don't you
dare. The same teams will win. Yeah. Same teams.
Give me my 12 teams. Drew, we kind of already answered this, but does the return of key UCF men's basketball players make UCF a legit threat to take the American this year?
Oh,
they do. And, with the, I don't want to say issues, but with Penny Hardaway toying with the idea of leaving Memphis, it starts to show a little bit of an opening. Cincinnati has cratered. South Florida, who to say they crater is an understatement. That was mass exodus to no prediction could have figured out how bad that was, thanks to our old pal Tom Harrion, heart attack man himself. With these teams kind of question marks around them, or just flat out, it's right for the taking. Houston is still a legit program, and UCF's going to have to play them out of their freaking minds to take them down. But this is a team that's had a year to put things together. They suffered through some bad luck and injuries, COVID, and being young and just not having a chance to gel. All those problems have been fixed. Now you add a center who actually can play, and you have a legit starting five that can go toe to toe with most programs. They definitely are a threat. I think coming in number 2, maybe number 3 is a very realistic possibility.
Lopez, you were shaking your head.
Yeah. Can we just play healthy for a handful of games first before we give them the championship?
Obviously, all that.
No, that's a legitimate question. We can't this program has had a history of injuries, and I think
every program goes through that, though. That you can't expect injuries. You can't predict that. I mean, you have to assume. No,
but you don't expect to get it.
You could say that they've had bad injury. I mean, we hear guys talk about injury luck, right?
Yeah, UCF doesn't have any.
They've had bad injury luck. Eventually, you get good injury luck.
Right, but this is not just recent. This goes back to the year before they made the NCAA, where we find out right in the eve of the start of the season that Aubrey Dawkins is out for the year because he injured his shoulder. And then that year, Taco and BJ don't even play together for more than a game. This team, I mean, they had injuries, whatever you want to call it. We don't know if this team can fit together as a group. Like, it looks good on paper, but can they play well together? We don't know. They haven't played together for a long period of time. They've had, moments, but I'm not going to say they're going to win the league. I think they're at best, 4th best team in the league.
Here's
if everything goes well.
Here's where I think you've missed the boat. This team has played together. Okay, remember Taco, Aubrey, and BJ never played together until that one year.
Yeah,
we've seen CJ Walker, Isaiah Adams, and Darius Perry all play together.
At times, sporadically.
No, not sporadically. They played together the entire year.
No. Walker has missed time. Perry had missed time.
Walker missed only missed a few games. Perry, the last 10 games, Eric, they played together the last 10 games.
Yeah, and they got smoked by Memphis. 9 of the last 10, and they got smoked.
They were 7-3 in their last 10, and they got smoked by Memphis at Memphis.
Correct. Which last I checked, Memphis is not leaving Memphis. So
right.
Memphis.
But I don't have as much faith in Memphis as you do, partly due to what Drew said, because Penny really did flirt with that Orlando Magic job, and that's going to have a very real effect, I think, on not just his current roster, but obviously recruiting.
Well, maybe down the road, maybe.
Now, Houston and Wichita, to me, are still the top 2 threats in the league. And I know everyone's like, well, Wichita,
I agree.
There's still something. Wichita is really trying to build that program back really quickly. Obviously, we know about Houston and them making the Final Four. That said, I think that if you're UCF, I think I hate, again, expectations, it's hard to say. I think they would love that their sort of in-house goal would be get that first round bye in the American tournament. I think that's kind of where they think if all things go top 4. You said no higher than 4.
Yeah, I don't think they're better than Houston. I don't think they're better. I don't think they're better than Memphis. I mean, you could say all that about Memphis, but Memphis still until they beat Memphis.
I think it could be a race between them and Wichita for that third spot.
They got to prove it on the court. And by the way, we're not even talking SMU, who I think could be in that mix as well. This team still has a lot of questions. I do. I still have questions about, do they have enough size? Do they have enough shooting? I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm going to be very cautious. Let's just put them all in a bubble wrap. First of all, in a bubble, and make sure they don't get hurt getting out of the car, getting out of the arena. Can we get some sponsorships to where they can stay safe and we don't need any freak injuries? No, I'm serious, because
college hunks hauling junk. I bet you they got some surplus bubble wrap they can probably.
We're just going to move on.
Orlando Health or Jewett Orthopedics. Come on, there you
go. Thank you.
Orlando Health bought out Jewett Orthopedic. Don't forget that. So, all right. Let's. I want to move over to. Okay, here's a. By
the way, we dismissed Tulsa too, which also will probably be. I mean, the league is very balanced. Tulsa. It's very balanced, and Health, a lucky bouncer too, could be the difference between a top 4 team and a top 8 team in the league.
Here's a softball question for you, Eric. With Aaliyah White gone, who steps into the role of ace for UCF softball? This is an easy one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be Gianna Mancha, more than likely. She's the veteran coming back, the ace coming back. Obviously, was all conference performer, threw a no-hitter last year. I think she will assume the number 1 starting pitching spot going into the season. I think that's the safest bet. But who's going to be behind her, I think, is going to be the bigger question there. Obviously was announced recently. Brianna Vasquez has moved on. She's transferring to Iowa. Not a real surprise. If you look at it, Brianna Vasquez was recruited by Coach Renee Lors-Gillespie, who's the head coach at Iowa. I think she struggled in this past year, and I think this is one of those things where, hey, I just want to do something different, which, by the way, there's over 1,000 kids on the transfer portal in softball. And I believe
softball alone, 1,000 students in the transfer portal. Wow.
And I think there's more in baseball. So welcome to free agency, everybody. It's here. So now UCF picked up a free agent of their own in transferring Kama Woodall, who was the ace at East Carolina. She's a senior from Spring Hill, Florida. I think the question there is, she has good stuff. She just needs a little bit more of movement in her pitches. I think that's something that Coach Bear will work on. But then, so I would say that Woodall going into the fall will be the number 2 behind Mancha. Then you've got Grace Jewell and Angelina DeVoe, who are the 2 youngsters, the 2 freshmen that got some time last year. Does Grace Jewell take that next step? You also have a young freshman that I'm interested in seeing, Caitlin Felton. True freshman coming in out of Verrico, Florida. I've heard good things about her. Throws hard. Can she be the next great one long term? That's one of the reasons why I'm looking forward to having fall ball back, both in baseball and softball, because those are going to be the things I'm going to be looking at. Does a Caitlin Felton kind of, is she ready to make an immediate impact like previous freshmen? That's how Aaliyah White did in the freshman year. Can she be that type or close to that and help a Mancha, Woodall, and then Jewell and company? So they have enough arms. It's just a question of, does Woodall take that, improve in some of her pitches, and then those youngsters, Jewell, DeVoe, and then Felt. Does any of those 3 or most of those 3 take that next step to contribute on it? I don't think one person will replace Aaliyah White.
Sports Bliss with Rob and Chris, one of our podcasting compatriots out there, asks, do you think this will be the best football recruiting class in school history, or will it fall short due to trying to get transfers that don't count in the recruiting class? That question is such a bait question. I'm not going to even bother answering it.
Drew,
do you have anything to say on that?
That's bait.
Sorry, guys. I'm not taking the bait on that one.
Check back in 3 years.
Yes. Well, anyone who follows me on Twitter knows exactly how I feel about recruiting rankings.
Yeah, I mean, we know UCF's had 4-star guys come in. I believe Chad Masco was a 4-star, and he really didn't pan out. I mean, stars.
He was a very good ball player. He wasn't an NFL level guy.
No. I mean, he had injuries and other stuff. Tomorrow's the game that I was working on as far as the Throwback Classic has him in there, and I got to watch him play a little bit and get hurt.
Yeah, that was a bummer.
I mean, recruiting rankings are nice. They're something to talk about. but, Blake Bortles was, barely recruited. Richie Grant's a 2-star. Kevin Smith was barely recruited. You take
Kenzie Milton was a 3-star kind of afterthought.
You can't really bank on the star system, because then you have what was his name? Blake Barnett, who ended up at USF, and he was a 5-star and he was a dud. It just, stars are very subjective, and you can't really live and die by them. It really comes down to the program and how you develop.
Yeah. All right. Moving on from that one before I start getting angry.
I want to see Jeff get angry.
Well, best class ever. We're going undefeated in the rest of the decade, right?
I got some here. Okay, here's a really interesting question from Corey Esquenazi. Which UCF team is the furthest away from competing for a national title? Now, I kind of view this question of it's not a question of which program is in dire straits. I think it's more a question that's about is the talent stratification in that particular sport such that it will be extremely difficult for UCF to compete for a national title. Which sport do you guys think?
Who wants to go first? So
the question is hardest.
Which UCF team is the furthest away from competing for a national championship?
I'm going to
go first. Yeah,
I'm going to go with baseball. I think baseball just seems to be the least constructed of the programs, as well as the fact that it's there's so many traditional powers in that sport that it's hard to crack through. You talk about blue bloods, baseball blue bloods or something else. And I just don't see them, breaking through that anytime soon. I mean, how many super regionals has UCF baseball been to?
0.
Exactly. I just don't see it.
I'm going to disagree with you on the baseball one, because we've seen teams in a similar situation as UCF all of a sudden get hot at the right time and go far. I'm talking about Coastal Carolina winning the College World Series a couple years ago. I'm talking about Fresno State when they beat Georgia, when Georgia was the best team in the country a few years ago, and they barely snuck into the tournament, then all of a sudden got hot. I think it's certainly. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm saying there's always a possibility, just due to the structure of the sport of baseball, that it can happen. Eric, what's your nomination?
Well, what was your pick then?
I'm going to reveal mine last.
He didn't give one.
I know, right? Isn't it?
Not yet.
So I think I love these questions because it is fascinating. Like, baseball is kind of a crapshoot. You could easily get on a run. We've seen teams do that. I think can I pick two? Because I think it's two.
Sure.
One will be very controversial. That's going to get a lot of people mad. The other one, I think it's women's basketball. And it's not a knock on what Abe is doing and UCF women's basketball is doing. It's more on women's basketball as a whole. The gap between the top 5 teams that are usually there competing for the national title and the teams that are top 25 is huge. And I think we saw that up close with UCF and Connecticut as an example. There's a gap, big gap. And I think that gap ain't slowing down anytime soon, no matter how good. I think UCF's taking big steps. I think they're on the borderline top 25 program. I really do. But they're not. Nobody is. There's a huge gap in women's basketball. You can pretty much figure out who the top 7, top 8 teams are every year.
And there's a drop from like 7, 8 down to 9.
Yeah, like we're talking a 20-point margin. So I think women's basketball, just because of the structure of the sport, and then the other one, I know this is going to tick people off, but it's football. It's football because, number one, clearly the majority of the audience here does not like the current system. So right off the bat, you don't believe you have a chance anyway. Okay, cool.
What about post 12 teams?
I think it's harder. It's just still going to be hard. UCF's not going to get a bye. Okay, unless there's criteria.
You're talking 17 game season right
correct.
There. That's an NFL season.
Yes. And teams like UCF, and they can recruit as great as they want. They're not going to have the depth of the Alabamas and the Clemsons and the Ohio States. This sport has always been dominated as well This is a misconception that college football fans have. There's this perception that there's parity in the sport. No, there isn't. No, there isn't. Ohio State, as long as they have the right coach, will always win the Big Ten. I don't care who Michigan has. I don't care who Penn State has. That is that conference, in fact, should change their name. In fact, the division should not even be East or West. It should be the Woody Hayes division, and it should be the Ryan Day division, because it's all Ohio State. Same thing in the SEC. As long as Alabama has the right coach, they own the SEC. Oklahoma owns the Big 12. The only conference really right now that really has parity is the Pac-12.
And a parity bad.
Parity bad because USC is down. You get to the 12-team playoff, those teams, the Clemson owns the ACC right now. Florida State before that. You go to 12, those teams are always going to be in the mix. It's actually easier for them now. And they're likely going to get the bye because they're going to get higher seeds, whereas a UCF, and I'm going to give you, Drew, credit because you've been on top of this. There's no, even if you, okay, so the big hoopla is, well, the G5's got a guaranteed spot. Cool. Do we know where they're going to get seeded? Do you think they're going to get seeded fairly? Because you don't believe they're getting seeded fairly now. Why do you think they're going to change all of a sudden? I think UCF's going to they're never going to get a top 4 seed. I don't care what they do. They're not going to get a top 4 seed. And they're going to have to win 4 games. And that's just not going to happen in college football.
3 of them on the road.
Yeah, 3 on the road, potentially. At bet now, could they host a game, in an 8-9 situation? Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
But then they got to play somebody that's probably had a bye, that's probably has more depth and more talent from a bigger brand. I actually think it's a lot harder now. I actually think 8 would have helped UCF. 8 helps UCF because then you only got to win 3 games, and there's no bye weeks. So now you're playing everybody in an even playing field. Instead, you're potentially going to be playing a Clemson at Ohio State or whatever, with them coming off a bye. And if they go on camp, if they decide to just get rid of the bowls and the neutral sites, who knows if they will. Now you got to go to their place. And that actually hurts UCF as well. If I'm UCF, I actually rather keep the neutral sites. I have a better chance of upsetting an Alabama or a Clemson or an Ohio State in a neutral field than I do at their backyard.
Well, also think of this. I would rather play in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium versus playing in wintertime at Ohio Stadium. I mean,
yes.
The shoe in winter, forget about it. No. Eric, I think, though, the women's basketball was spot on. That was the other team I was kind of juggling with between baseball and women's basketball. But I'm glad I said baseball because it opened the door for you to really. No,
I think women's. And again, I don't. And it's not a knock. And it's not a knock on UCF football. And I think Gus. And I think they're going to do great things. But
it's
I do
think that
it's the system. And I think there's still a lot of questions. And Andrew, I'm going to give you credit because you've asked a lot of these that, quite frankly, a lot of the college football media has not asked because they're too dumb. They're too busy having have their nose up.
Care.
They don't. Yeah, they're just snotty. They're snotty. They're not bright. But there's a lot of legitimate questions still to be asked about this 12-team playoff. Where are these games going to get played? Why should the top, and how much money, by the way, is a G5 going to get? Because we just assume, okay, you're going to get this free spot. What's the catch?
Yeah, here's the payout going to be.
Is the payout going to be, hey, guys, you're guaranteed spot, but guess what? You're probably going to just make the same money that you did in the previous TV deal, or maybe you'll just make less of the pie where we get more money. How do you feel? Oh, that's right. You got no choice. We don't know. There's a lot of questions still.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason why they can't even go to the next phase until September because a lot of this stuff, they're not even going to get to the financials until later on. That's why the idea of 2023 was absolutely absurd. No chance. This is going to go all the way to the end of the contract and to figure out how to do this because it took years.
Well, there's a lot of contracts. Lawyers are going to step in here. Like, you don't just get rid of bold contracts, and especially that one in Pasadena that kind of carries its weight.
Oh yeah, who doesn't want to bend on certain things?
Yeah,
and basically what I've read is either they're going to have to play ball or they're getting left behind.
Yeah, leave him behind. Let him be.
Well, they have, how many people have said that for years and it doesn't happen? Like this year's playoff is going to be on New Year's Eve because the Rose Bowl refuses to move out of January 1st. So it's easy to say, well, let him be. That hasn't happened.
Leave him behind.
You can't, once you have a 12-game system, you can't just keep catering to them. It's just not going to work.
You wouldn't think, but they've catered them to this point. I got to see them tell them you're done because it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened.
And one other thing, after TCU played in the Rose Bowl when they were still a member of the Mountain West, the Rose Bowl came out and said a G5 school will never play in our bowl again. Well, guess what? If you want to play in this, a G5 may end up in your game again.
Maybe. Yeah. We'll see. A lot of questions. All
right. We'll get to more football questions in a second. I got my sport. Eric, I was going to say exactly what you said, women's basketball.
Yeah.
Because the gap
Say something different now.
Well, I think it's the one sport that's similar to that, where you have a concentration of talent at the very top in terms of the top 4, 5, 6 teams, and then it filters down below that. It's not quite the same as basketball, but volleyball. I think once you get down to about 10, 11, 12, 13, that top 10 teams, right? You're talking most of the Pac-10, most of the top tier of the Big 10, the top tier of the Big 12, and then there's that pretty precipitous drop-off even amongst the power conferences. We only just saw the SEC win a volleyball championship this year for the first time in the conference's history. So if we're about 10 to 15 schools, and then there's that big drop-off, and the reason why is because there are only so many 6'4" women out there who can be outside hitters and are that athletic, right?
Yep.
Usually at this level, you're going to be a middle blocker. You could be an outside hitter, but these teams, like we saw when you see the Stanfords, the Floridas of the world, and give credit to Florida, they've been very good under Mary Wise for a long time. When you see all these guys, all these teams, they are stacked with 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and they got 6 or 7 of them in the lineup, like on regular rotation.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And that's not a
knock on UCF's program at all.
No, not even close. Because they can compete, but again, that's hard. It's hard.
And we've beaten those teams in the past before.
Yeah,
but we've beaten USC. Okay, we've come very close to beating Florida. We've beaten Florida State.
But you're right. It's hard, especially in a normal year. You got the Big Ten, Texas.
Look at Florida State. I mean, they're a power program in the ACC, but they're not going to beat. They can't beat like 2 consecutive Pac-12 teams in a row.
No. Mary Wise is a Hall of Fame volleyball type coach. They've had a tremendous. They haven't won a national title. They haven't. Right. So I agree. I think that's a good one. I think volleyball, women's basketball. Let's put football aside because that's a whole system structure, debate and all that. I think volleyball, women's basketball is right. And you mentioned women's basketball. The gap, the reason the top teams have big, real, we think UCF has a lot of tall players. No. Watch Baylor's of the world and UConn. They just have tall players. We've seen
at that. Go back and look at that NCAA final this past year. It was Kentucky and I forget who was playing, who they were playing.
Texas in the volleyball one you're talking about?
Yeah, Kentucky and Texas.
Yeah.
High-level volleyball match between those two teams. They were it was an outstanding match, and you just look at the sheer size, and it's just mind-boggling.
It is.
It's absolutely mind-blowing especially when you see it in person. And I've seen it in person. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
I agree. I disagree about baseball, Drew, only because if UCF, the best UCF baseball team I ever saw was 2001. Justin Pope, Jason Arnold got screwed out of hosting. They should have hosted. They didn't host facilities-wise, whatever. We're not going to get into it.
If they host, they go to a super regional, that team.
Not only they go to the Supers, I think they go to the World Series and play Greg Lovelady in Miami for the national title because that team was built on Pope and Arnold, a 1-2 punch. They had to go to South Carolina. The problem in the regional is you need that third pitcher. UCF didn't have that. So they had to use Jason Arnold in that first game against Princeton. It caught up with them because South Carolina just had too much depth. If UCF wins that regional, they would have played Stanford, who ended up playing for the national title. They would have had Pope and Arnold lined up game 1, game 2 in a best of 3. I would have taken my chances with those two guys. I think they would have gotten to the World Series, and we might have seen Miami and UCF play for the national title. You can do that. We've seen that in baseball. Coastal Carolinas won the national title 5 years ago. Fresno State beat a team that Jeff knows well, Georgia, that had a bunch of MLB talent.
Gordon Beckham was the best player in the country that year. He had a long MLB career, Gordon Beckham.
Right. I mean, so baseball, it's a crapshoot once you get in. I mean, East Carolina's been knocking on the door. They've been right there in the supers. Softball, UCF just lost to Florida State in a tight regional that was one win away from winning the national title this year. So they're not that far off. And I think men's soccer's in the Sweet 16s now. Women's soccer has been a team that's contended, been to the Elite Eight.
Been to the Elite Eight, yeah.
So soccer you can get in, especially men's soccer. It's a smaller field. Not as many teams participate in it. I think tennis, I think if we would have had this question years ago, we would have said tennis, pre-Roddick era, right? But
this is a different tennis program.
It's a different deal. Tennis is in the mix, and golf has always been in the mix. I mean,
that comes with being in Florida.
It also comes with being invested in, too, as Danny White did invest in tennis. And I think that was key.
And
the facilities are fantastic.
Right. And men's basketball, if you get into the tournament, we've seen it, you can get hot and get to a Final Four like a VCU and stuff like that. So that's not crazy either, even though there's a gap, but not as big because of the tournament. So I think that's a great question, but I think volleyball, women's hoops, I tend to agree, are those two. Football for different reasons, just for the structure and the uncertainty of what they have to go through. Not to mention the fact we don't even know what the criteria is for them to get in. They could go 11-1 in a year and miss out because a team, a directional school from the MAC goes undefeated and gets their spot.
Question from Ladarius.
Yes, I took a shot at the MAC, by the way. Yes, that was a shot.
Question from Ladarius Brown, old student of mine, podcaster over on the Space Coast. Says, how will UCF's offense look under Gus Malzahn? My feeling on this is it's going to look a lot more frosty than
hype-y. You see what he did there, Drew? You see?
A lot more frosty than hype-y. With a little bit more power, a little bit more. But I think you're going to see a lot more, instead of the classic air raid and north-south running game that we saw under Heupel the last 3 years, it's going to be a lot more around the edges, try and, a little bit more misdirection that we're going to see. Frost didn't really do. He did a fair amount of misdirection, but I don't think we're going to. I think that Gus is going to do a lot more of it. Anthony Lenahan broke this down really well in a piece for us that I'll put in the show notes, where like Gus will run 5 or 6 different plays off of the same look, formation and pre-snap motion. And it's so hard for a defense to just keep track of what everyone's doing. What do you guys think? Drew, we'll go with you.
Well, he wrote the book on the no huddle offense. So part of that,
quite literally,
he wrote the book. So part of it is he's going to keep the same people on the field, so you don't have that stoppage for substitution. So that's why you're going to see 6 plays, 5 plays run from the same formation. You're going to see a lot of misdirection. It's going to be a much shorter field compared to what you saw during the Heupel or Frost era, where they liked going downfield. You're not going to see as much of that. And we saw that at the spring game, where it was a lot more short and medium, which is where Ryan O'Keefe really stepped up and did an outstanding job, as a receiver, and where Jalen Robinson struggled a bit adjusting. And he was pretty much non-existent. I think we're going to see a lot more traditional from that standpoint. UCF's personnel has changed a bit. They have a power back that they haven't had since Taj McGowan was here in 2018. They don't have a pure speed guy that they're going to have on the top end of the rotation. I like Johnny Richardson, but he's going to end up being buried in the depth chart again with all the transfers that have come in. So you're going to see a lot more of I don't want to say vanilla, but you're going to see a lot more traditional offense compared to what you've seen since 2016.
Eric, nobody is more excited about Gus Malzahn than you.
I don't know about all that. I would say a lot of people are excited in general. I mean,
I've got receipts here from our group chats from back when Gus was hired here.
I'm a big Gus fan. Look, in fairness, me and Drew did pick Gus Malzahn as the next head coach on our list, right?
I'd like to point out we did 2 articles.
Yep.
And I made sure the cover picture of both of them was Gus Malzahn, because every ingredient was in place for him to be the guy that late in the process, not requiring a buyout. No school gets ticked off or screwed over. I mean, everything screamed Gus Malzahn, and lo and behold.
All right.
A few things. I would say I'm with Drew. I think it's a more traditional offense, just going faster if they have to go faster. I think they could also go slow if they have to. I think you'll see some variety. I don't think they're going to be stuck on one tempo like we've seen recently. I know the comparison, but would you agree with that, Drew? I don't think this is like hypo was a one-dimensional deal. If they had to go fast, and if they didn't, they were in trouble. Whereas I think Gus
suffered for it too.
Yes,
they suffered badly for it.
Live by the 9 route and die by the 9 route. That's what that was.
That 2019 defense was fantastic, but you wouldn't know about it because of how the offense played.
Right.
I expect Gus Malzahn to be a lot more cognizant of the fact that his defense needs time. So yeah, you can go no huddle, have a shorter, run a shorter offense. So instead of, a 3-play drive, you can make it a 7, 8, 9-play drive, tire that defense down, get the touchdown, and give your defense plenty of time to rest, and then do it all over again and just beat them into submission.
Southwest Georgia Knight, SWGA Knight. Which incoming transfer do you think will have the biggest impact on the success of the football team in 2021? Andrew.
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a really good question because there's a lot of transfers to go around. The guy I think will have the biggest impact is going to be Big Cat down on the defensive line. That's an area that definitely has a need. Definitely got hurt with players getting thrown off the team last year. And definitely can use a shot in the arm next to Kalia Davis, who's going to be a beast from the depths of the abyss. You put those two together, you're going to have a lot of disruption that's going to just make life easier for everybody else on the defensive field. As far as a second guy, it's a toss-up. I think Bowser from Northwestern gives the offense a power back that they've sorely needed. But I don't know how much use he's actually going to get based on the nature of the offense. So I think Big Cat's going to be that number one guy.
Eric?
That's a really good. He stole my thunder on that. Defensive line is a big question. I have a lot of questions about the defense in general, which we'll get into. I think, there's going to be some magic wands that are going to happen for this defense to be good. But that could be one of them. You're going to have some new faces have to step up, and defensive line is one. And I think Drew makes a great point with Cat. You always got to be good on the defensive front. When UCF's been good defensively, usually they get good play up front. Look at 17 and the great play they got up front. They don't get pushed around. In this league, if you want to beat Cincinnati and moving forward, you got to be physical up front. You don't want to get pushed around. This team's been pushed around, in particular last year. I think that Drew makes a great point.
One guy I think I'm going to be keeping a close eye on, Mark Anthony Richards, the running back from Auburn, who is already familiar with how Gus runs things. I really didn't want to pick somebody who is a running back because the backfield is already so crowded as it is. But I think he's got such a leg up. 6'1", 208. He's from Wellington. And has that 2 years of experience that he had at Auburn. I think he's going to be really interesting to see in the backfield. Him and Brandon Johnson, the receiver who came over from Tennessee, son of Charles Johnson.
Yeah.
Shout out to Greg Lovelady, whose idol is Charles Johnson, the former Marlins catcher. I think he's going to be. He has the potential to step into a really key role with Marlon Williams gone. I think like size-wise, he really does match up nicely with Marlon's measurables.
They're both very stacked positions.
Yes.
Wide receiver and running back. Running back more so than wide receiver is just absolutely stacked with talent.
Two more questions. Balsamic Vin, I'm PaulJug42 on Twitter. We've seen him for quite a bit, for a long time on this platform. What year does Gus Malzahn win his first conference title with UCF? Eric, we'll go with you first.
Wow, man. I'm going to say 2022. 2022. Okay, I think this year is going to be a tough year.
Why is this year a tough year? Is it because of the adjustment to the new system? Is it the schedule? What is it?
Yes. Yes, to all of that.
Okay.
It's adjustment to it's adjustment to the schemes. You look at the schedule. They got to go to Cincinnati. They got to go to SMU. They got to go to Navy. You know, it's funny. Me and Drew were talking in the late hours while Drew was getting pounded, crushed by Tropical Storm Elsa down in Sarasota, surviving. We were talking about the...
Let it go, Eric.
I'm just saying. They were off again.
He missed the joke, Drew. Did you see that? He totally missed the joke. Anyway.
No, I got it.
He got it.
I know you did.
So, but if you look at the American this year, Cincinnati's probably going to be the favorites. They got Desmond Ritter back. SMU. People talk about, you just asked about, we were talking about the transfer impact. SMU's got some impact transfer guys, including at the quarterback position, possibly Mordecai from Oklahoma, maybe starts, who knows. So UCF's got to go to SMU in November. They got to go to Cincinnati. Got to go to Navy, which is still a tough place. I expect Navy to bounce back because they usually don't have 2 bad years in a row under that coaching staff. I think that's a big ask. And I do, this might sound sacrilegious. Dylan Gabriel and Drew, we've talked about this on Night Shift. He's still got a lot of things to prove. He does not have a good record against winning teams that have good, in his 2 years as a starter. He's taking advantage of some weaker teams that don't play defense. There's still questions. Can you win? He's lost to Cincinnati twice. I'm not saying it's his fault, but he has struggled at times. We've seen it. And now he's going to have a new system. Hopefully it helps him. I think it will. But I think there's still questions here.
Well, one of the things he has to shake off is he a system quarterback?
Right.
And that's probably the biggest hit on him is Josh Heupel's system was, the air raid. It's just take it and chuck it deep and hope for the best. And that was wide receivers are, our guys are faster than your guys. And that was really it. It really had no nuance to it. So he has great downfield accuracy. I mean, some of the best that I've seen. His short to medium game needs work. And that's where, Gus Malzahn's offense is going to be focused on this, short to medium. I personally think Dylan Gabriel is gone after this year. I think he's going to move on and try to parlay a strong season into the NFL draft. And you're going to look at most likely the Mikey Keene era starting next year, because I think he's going to be the guy. But you're absolutely right. He's got, something to prove. He has struggled against teams that, and particularly run a 3-5 and
3-3-5, yeah.
Yeah, a 3-3-5 and crash the line like that. He's, Tulsa's run it, Cincinnati's run it, Pitt has run it, and every time it's been run, he has struggled. And I don't know if that's from the scheme, just, the coaching staff not being able to rise up against that scheme, or if it's just Gabriel's happy feet getting the best of him. But every time it happens, he has struggled. So the recipe of taking down Dylan Gabriel is well known. He's going to have to prove that it's not his kryptonite. Josh Heupel was his kryptonite.
Interesting. I think we should give Dylan Gabriel the benefit of the doubt until we actually see how everything runs out. I do think that the toughest part of the season, you mentioned adjusting to a new system, Eric. I don't think that's going to be as difficult as people think, because Gus knows how to adapt a system to his players from being a former high school coach. I think he'll make the system relatively easy to transition to. In that respect. Now, the question is whether or not the defenses will also be easy to adjust to the transition.
I was going to say.
That's the other thing. Now, however, I do think that the big issue is that schedule. And here's why. Your bye week is really early. It's in September, okay? It's after the Louisville game, right? And before you start conference play against Navy. You start conference play at Navy. And like we said, we don't know what Navy team is going to show up. They were bad last year, but I don't know if they're going to be quite that bad this year. You're home for East Carolina, but you're at Cincinnati on October the 16th. That's going to be a national TV game. And then you have this is the part that's underrated. You have a short week after the game in Cincinnati when you play Memphis.
Yeah.
It's a 6-day week that week because you play them on a Friday night. Granted, it's at home, but still. Don't know what we're going to get from Temple. Tulane is going to be, I think, tougher this year. They were tough last year, to be honest with you, even though you get them at home. And then you're right, that November 13th game at SMU,
Always is a problem.
Yeah.
They've never had. Now they've won, but it's never been pretty.
Yeah, it's never been easy. I always think about that last game in 2013 when the field was frozen.
Oh,
remember that?
That was an ugly game.
God, that game was horrendous.
Yeah.
It was like, 17-10 or something like that?
It was a terrible game. Blake Bortles had 2 rushing touchdowns.
Guys were literally skating on that field.
Yeah,
skating on that
awful
field.
game.
It was crazy. Oh my gosh.
I never actually answered the question.
Okay.
But I actually have to agree with Eric. My number was always going to be year 2. The pieces just fall in place. You lose some of those 1-year transfers, but you start getting your people in place, and you have a much more favorable schedule.
Yeah, I think the odds will be better in 2022, but I don't think their chances are non-zero this year. I think that if they're able to pull it together, I think that Cincinnati game is going to be key. If they win that Cincinnati game, you beat Desmond Ridder in Cincinnati. Look out. Look out.
Of course, there's a non-zero chance. We're not saying that it's not going to, they don't have a chance. We're just saying it's a better chance that it happens next year versus this year.
Yeah. Right. You're more comfortable. Schedule will be favorable. Ritter will be gone. Who knows? Luke Fickell, maybe he's gone by then too. That'd be nice.
If Dylan Gabriel comes back.
Maybe. But I think it's still, they got to go on the road, and to win on the road, you got to play good defense. And I'm not convinced this team can play good defense unless Travis Williams could scheme it up and hide some things. Remember, this team was not a good defense at all, and they lost a Jim Thorpe finalist who's going to be playing on Sundays.
Well, I've got to kind of cut you down a little bit there. Part of the fact they weren't good is because they had no depth. You lose 5 guys from getting thrown off the field. You lose 4 guys on your 2 deep before the season even starts because of COVID opt-outs. There were just no horses. You're putting true freshmen in who have no business being on the field. That's not, the fact that the team was bad. That's just circumstantial.
Some of it, but how many of those guys were legitimately good? Will they improve? Now again, with a new scheme, they're
true freshmen. You can't expect true freshmen. Look at how Zach Wilson just carved up the UCF defense.
Well, that's different. The bowl game, that was just that was just
by the end of the season, it was a skeleton crew. Their attrition was bad this year.
But that goes. But again, that's part of it is luck. You got to stay healthy. That's not going to change this fall. That's
part of it was also the lack of the offseason program, though. Let's not forget that. We talked about basketball earlier.
Yeah.
In case in football leading into that season.
But 5 guys getting thrown off the team, that's not bad luck. That's bad decisions. And UCF's had outstanding luck over the years since George O'Leary when it came to team discipline and not getting in trouble.
Well, I think you're right. We're going to find out this year, at the end of this year, how much talent was this team? Because, I think a lot of people felt like after 2016 and 17, it's like, wow, we had more talent than we thought in 2015. Is this a case where we find out later, you know what, this team just wasn't really that well coached? There was we have talent. They just didn't play as well under that scheme. They play better on this scheme. Or they're going to continue to struggle, and then maybe we come to the realization that maybe some of these guys are not as good as we think. Well, I don't know the answer. But I'm looking forward to finding out.
All right.
If you look at the defensive rankings from 2019, UCF's defense was actually pretty good. They were ranked 42nd in the country.
Well, you look at that secondary too they had back then.
2019 was great.
Right.
So right. If the drop off from 2019 to 2020, Tay Gowan opted out. Khalid Davis opted out. Dawson opted out. You've lost 4 guys on your 2 deep from 2019 who played. Who were going to contribute and be a big part. You can't plan for that, and that's nobody's fault. Everyone's got to make decisions that's best for them and best for their family, and we can't be mad about it. But we have to accept the fact that UCF had more opt-outs than any other team in the country, and it was by more than 1. In fact, there was only 1 team in the whole country that had more than 10 opt-outs, and it was UCF. It is what it is.
I want to end this on a fun question. We're going to get it from Corey Eskenazi again. What would be a perfect match sponsorship deal for a former Knight athlete if they had current name, image, and likeness roles? By the way, this is on the heels of the entire UCF women's basketball team getting a deal with College Hunks Hauling Junk and Storage, or
So
hauling
is this
junk
for
and
a
moving.
team or an individual player?
He's asking about an individual. What would be a perfect match sponsorship deal for a former Knight athlete if they had current name, image, and likeness rules?
I got one. It's gonna be Kevin Smith in the Seminole Hard Rock Casino.
Why?
I mean, it's all gold, baby.
God. Oh man, Eric.
Wait.
I don't know if that one would have been allowed, but anyway.
It may not be. Okay, I have the Golden Diamond source as a backup
All right.
in the Tampa area.
Wow. See now,
Kevin was a South Florida kid, though. I don't think he would have gone with the Tampa business.
Hey, if they're showing some green, it's possible he could have gone somewhere else. But
is this any athlete in any sport, or are we talking?
Any athlete in any sport.
By the way, the women's basketball thing's pretty clever because I know
I thought it was cool.
Well, think about it. A lot of people are wondering, geez, there's going to be animosity in the locker room and everything. Well, no.
Nope. Not if
they're all
everyone's
getting
part of the deal.
And I
they're all getting
wonder,
a piece of the pie.
and I do wonder if we'll see more of that. Like, that's
I would like
something
to see that.
And
What's interesting to me is that the players negotiated that on their own. Because UCF can't, by rule, UCF cannot promote, be involved in any sort of business deal like that. But they all did it on themselves. And Masani Kaba was kind of the ringleader of that, which I thought was really cool. So, but give me an athlete. You got to have something softball, Eric, right? Come on.
I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to think. Well, you go give the answer because I really don't have an answer right now.
Oh, I got one. All right. Stephanie Best from softball and DeBest, the carpet shop down on off of 50. Because Stephanie was the best, right? The ads write themselves.
Wow. It's not bad. Yeah, I don't know.
Lance McDonald at McDonald's. I mean,
Lance McDonald.
How about this?
God.
Vic Penn. Because he could be sponsored by
Bic Pens.
There you go.
I like it.
That's the one that jumps out to me right there.
I would have had
Mike Walker. He gets Johnny Walker.
I don't know if that would have worked if he was under 21.
Former.
Hello. We're missing the obvious one here. Brandon Marshall. Back then, Marshalls.
All right. I was thinking like the entire offensive line from the 2007 team that got Kevin Smith 2,500 rushing yards in one season for like a barbecue place like Four Rivers, right?
That's too easy.
Bringing home the bacon.
I feel like that's stereotyping too.
That's too easy. I mean, you got the Hogs from Washington. That's so low hanging fruit.
That's why it would have been perfect. It's the perfect low hanging fruit. You got any other ones?
I mean, you could do like Super Pawn with any player that wore those ugly gold jerseys because trade them in for some cash.
No, you can't do that. Stop. You're going to get us in trouble. What about Jermaine Taylor?
Ooh,
I'm thinking, dude, like pick an OIA, Orlando International Airport, high flying Jermaine Taylor, right?
Probably something like that. You could probably work something like that. Yeah.
I mean, that's easy, right? Flight one, ready for takeoff, baby.
I like that one. Or you can do, isn't that there by not far from Orlando Executive, that water sport place? You can put like Mike O'Donnell there for all the splash threes he had.
Oh. We should ask MOD like what would have been we should ask Mike and Taylor what would have been their perfect NIL sponsors. Gotta do that. We gotta do that. That's going on the list.
And Will Beknowski will just be sponsored by Ashton Kutcher.
Whatever Ashton Kutcher, yes. All right. And we had one last one, but we actually got an answer for it before. Matthew Petty, friend of the show from WMFE, the editor and resident Kiwi, being from New Zealand, asks, when is UCF going to get a cricket team? we already have a club cricket team. And I think that they played in the last they played was 2018. Matthew, there's an opportunity for you there, and you don't have to worry about name, image, and likeness rules because it's club sports anyway. All right, that's going to do it. Make sure you send us your questions. If you send us some more, we'll answer them right here on the show. UCF_Banneret on Twitter, Jeff_Sharon, Eric Lopez Elo, Statboy Drew on Twitter. Let's do a quick preview, Drew. What do you got coming up on your Throwback Classics, which are coming out Thursday?
Oh, well, tomorrow's or on Thursday.
It's a controversial one, I understand.
Well, it's not a win. It's actually a loss. It's the first loss I'm putting out there. And
how dare you? How dare you?
That is the most impactful loss in UCF football history. And it's the UCF versus Marshall.
Well, it's not the Texas game. I know that.
UCF Marshall 2002.
Yeah, 26-21. I remember that. That game was played on. First of all, that game was played on an odd night, wasn't it?
It was a Friday night. I was at that game because I was in the marching band.
You were in Huntington. Okay.
I was in Huntington, and the atmosphere was so hostile, and the fans were so rabid. We thought people were going to jump down onto the field and attack. They actually had the male members of the band on the outside walking into the field and the women on the inside just in case. Now, granted, nothing happened, but think about it. UCF being a young program, the band different being a young.
I remember around here there was a lot of hype heading into that game. It was our conference opener.
It was the most hyped game by ESPN in UCF history at that point. They hammed the living daylights out of it.
They went to Minnesota. They went to Minneapolis, and they got Randy Moss and Dante Culpepper, who were both on the Vikings at the time, to do the little cold open intro to the game telecast, which I thought was cool.
It was cool how much they hyped up this game in the Mid-American Conference. I mean, you don't think about it, but we talked, we've always joked about, the civil conflict, UCF versus Connecticut. This was UCF's first manufactured rivalry. It was manufactured by ESPN, and it turned out to actually be a pretty good one. 0-3 to start. UCF has won 9 straight. Ever since they went to Conference USA, they have never lost to Marshall. You could throw the 2019 Gasparilla Bowl in there as well. And
that was back when the MAC had some talent.
Well, part of why Marshall did so well in the MAC is they allowed partial qualifiers. Guys who couldn't get in other schools, they can get in those MAC schools, and that's where Marshall really excelled. Once they went to Conference USA, that was no longer allowed, and you've never seen them get even close to that level of success since.
Yeah, think about the talent that was around that league at that time, not just at UCF.
About
Brandon Marshall, Ben Roethlisberger at Miami of Ohio. Byron Leftwich was being touted as a Heisman Trophy candidate that year. Mm-hmm. I remember very clearly. Doug Chapman, who Bucks fans remember, was around there. Not just Michael the Burner Turner at Northern Illinois, who I think led the country in rushing that one year.
Michael the Burner Turner, I remember him.
And then not only that, the Toledo that year was very good, and they really didn't have that many stars on that team, but they came within an eyelash of winning the conference. That was when the MAC had talent.
Yeah, and a lot of these guys flew under the radar. This is back when TV was not as readily available. Half of UCF's games weren't televised
at all.
Yes, many of them lost to the archives of time because they never were on television. Some of the greatest games that we've seen, like Akron getting curb stomped 57-17 the previous year, when they wanted to give UCF a brass knuckles welcome to the MAC. Yeah, I was at that game too. That was a lot of fun.
Me too. Star running back, Alex Haynes, by the way. Haynes sponsors. Huh?
Oh, there you go.
Good one.
If you really want to, and if Haynes waits too long, Fruit of the Loom's going to come in and sweep him up. But that Akron game, I don't know if you guys remember, it was 50-7 at halftime.
Yeah.
And then the second half kickoff was delayed by like 15 minutes. I don't know if you guys remember that at all.
Yes.
Akron couldn't find any kicking tees. That's what happened.
Really?
I know what happened to them all too.
Yeah.
They just lost the kicking tees?
No, there was a certain member
Someone
of the band
stole them
with sticky fingers and really good sticky fingers that managed to liberate the kicking tees. It wasn't me. I just know who it was.
Golly, that's amazing. Oh, God. You guys, I know you have a lot more band stories about some of the crazy stuff that you guys pulled off on the road. With opposing teams.
We
swiping
had a guy
kicking tees. My God.
We had a guy get on ESPN radio the very next year for trying to steal a flag at Ohio University. Everyone told him not to do it. Even the guy who stole the kicking tee says, "Nah, man, I'm not doing that." And he went and did it, and he got taken away.
Oh boy.
It made national radio.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, that's an excellent way to end it.
By the way, Travis Fisher was on that UCF team. Think of all the sponsorships he could have got with the last name Fisher.
Gordon's Fisherman.
We weren't in UCF. Back then they weren't in the conference. They were in the MAC. They would have made a lot of money though.
So he joined Fisher Price and teach kids how to learn and grow and cover downfield routes.
There you go.
Golly. All right. We're going to get out of this show before I get into trouble here. Follow us at UCF_Banneret on Twitter, Facebook.com/Black and Gold Banneret. And of course, blackandgoldbanneret.com. We are SB Nation's home for UCF sports. Subscribe to this podcast if you don't already via Apple Podcasts, or if you are on an Android device via Spotify. If you don't subscribe to us, please do so. If you do subscribe to us, please tell one of your UCF friends about us as well. Make sure you leave a comment and subscribe, or leave a comment and leave us a rating, actually, on your preferred podcast platform of choice. And of course, don't forget to follow us at blackandgoldbanneret.com. That's going to do it for us here at Black and Gold Banneret. For Drew and Eric, I'm Jeff. We'll catch you again next week.